All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Monford, and I am the Events and Outreach Coordinator at the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. I would like to start by acknowledging the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose traditional and unceded territory I come to you from today. The Canadian Apprenticeship Forum recognizes that the Indigenous landscape of Canada is broad and encompasses many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We respect and affirm the inherent and treaty right of all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. They are the traditional stewards of the lands from which we all attend. I ask that you share in the chat box which traditional territory you are joining the meeting from today. CAF is a nonprofit organization that connects Canada's apprenticeship community. Participants work collaboratively to support vibrant and innovative apprenticeship systems and policies with a view to developing a highly skilled, inclusive, and mobile skilled trades workforce. CAF is pleased to be partnering with CICAN to create opportunities for knowledge sharing and dialogue about climate literacy. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. To ensure an enjoyable experience and reduce background noise, attendees have been muted. For the best viewing experience, we recommend this speaker view setting. If you have any questions or comments during the panel, please enter them through the chat function. We'll have a brief Q&A period at the end, and if we are unable to answer during the live broadcast, staff will follow up post-event. We will be sharing a recording of this presentation with participants. It is now my pleasure to introduce Judy Varga-Toth, Manager of Impact Partnership Services, Government Relations, and Canadian Partnerships with Colleges and Institutes Canada. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you so much, Emma. And hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm really pleased to be here today to work with the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum to bring our college experts who are working on greening and decolonizing the trades, bring to you so that you can hear what we have been working on and where we are going with this project. So next slide, please. Thank you. So next slide. And one more. Thank you. So Colleges and Institutes Canada is Canada's national voice for publicly supported colleges, institutes, CEGEPs, and polytechnics. We have over 140 members across the country, and 95% of Canadians and 86% of Indigenous peoples live within 50 kilometers of a college or institute. So we are quite literally everywhere across the country, and you can see on the map, the dots represent the 700 or so campuses of our member institutions. Next slide, please. So this project, the Impact Climate Project, just like all of the projects at CICAN, are inspired by and framed by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 goals, which were ratified in 2015 by all member nations of the United Nations, call upon the world to transform itself by 2030 into a more just, sustainable world. This particular project is under the inspiration of SDG 13, Climate Action. Next slide, please. But you'll see that the project touches on numerous different SDGs. So today we're here to talk about the construction and landscape sector or trades. And this slide shows you a visual that was developed by the World Green Building Council, where they did some work to look at how the building sector aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So across the bottom, you can see SDGs 3, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, and 17, which are the goals that they have identified as being the ones primarily related to the building sector. The next slide, you'll see that in our project, we're going to go even further beyond that. We touch on many more SDGs. The project itself, where you hear a summary here, of the project, you can go back to that slide. The overall Impact Climate Project is aiming to raise awareness about greenhouse gas emissions, about climate change, and how campuses and individuals on campuses and institutions as a whole can and must reduce our greenhouse gases so that we reach net zero by 2050. We are also funding demonstration projects on campus and many other activities to support our members in moving in the direction of net zero. Today, we'll be talking specifically about item 5, which is the development of faculty training modules for trades instructors. Next slide, please. And in this slide, you can see that our work, while it is primarily inspired by SDG 13 and the sub-targets within SDG 13 that you can see on the side, we are also integrating other important SDGs, including number 10 and number 16, because in our project, we are recognizing our responsibility and centering Indigenous knowledges and wisdom into the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So the United Nations, UNESCO, developed what they call the Greening TVET framework. TVET is Technical and Vocational Education and Training. It's the international word for colleges, if you will. And they had a framework for greening our sector with the 5 pillars that you see across the page here. So greening our campuses, greening our curriculum, greening our community, our applied research, and the culture of our colleges. And when we looked at this framework here in Canada with all of you, our members, we recognized that we had not integrated appropriately Indigenous reconciliation in Canada. And so you can see that we added on top of these approaches to greening TVET, Indigenous ways of knowing. And you'll see in this project how we very much centered that as we develop these greening modules. Next slide, please. So we incorporate two-eyed seeing, which is a concept that has come to us from Elder Dr. Albert Marshall, who really recognized the importance of seeing things 2 different ways. The what we would call more of the Western or colonial way of seeing things, and then the more traditional Indigenous way of seeing. And in this word clouds, you can see the difference. We're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about developing a sustainable world, but we use different concepts and language, but we're all driving to the same outcome. Next slide, please. So today we're going to be hearing from my colleagues at 3 different institutions who have been working to integrate the concepts of greening, the green skills, as well as applying an Indigenous lens to the work of 4 particular trades. And you can see them here in the circle. You can see that we've centered Indigenous ways of perceiving and approaching sustainability. We have the 4 different trades. So we have the electrical trades, carpentry, HVAC, and landscaping. And then around the outer circle, you can see the different things that we're integrating concretely as skills into each of the 4 training modules. And along the side, you can see the colleges, some of whom are here today, who are going to talk to you about the work that they're doing. Next slide, please. So next slide, we're going to talk to you a little bit just about some vocabulary to ensure everybody can understand what our presenters will be sharing about. So we talk about the carbon footprint. So every institution and individual has a carbon footprint. It just means the amount of greenhouse gases, of which there are many. The most commonly known one is carbon dioxide. That's why we call it a carbon footprint. But methane, for example, is another one of the greenhouse gases. So our carbon footprint is all the emissions that we produce individually and collectively as we go about our lives, as we build buildings, as we drive around, as we extract energy, as we grow our food, etc. And then we also use the term CO2 equivalent, which simply means it's just another way of saying the amount of GHG emissions related to activities such as driving, heating, cooling, manufacturing, etc. Next slide, please. We can differentiate between 2 types of carbon emissions. We have embodied carbon and operational carbon. Operational carbon is the one we usually think about because it means the carbon that is generated by the operation of a building, by the operation of a vehicle. So when you drive a car and we have emissions coming out of the tailpipe, that's operational carbon. But in order to build that car, there was first embodied carbon. There were greenhouse gas emissions related with the building of the car, just like there are with the building of the building. So there are emissions associated with the entire spectrum, from designing the building, from bringing all the materials on site, from putting together all the materials, creating your building. And then once the building is up and running, then you have operational carbon, which is your heating and your cooling, the lights, and all the other functions that a building has. Next slide, please. What we're aiming towards is net zero. In Canada, we've committed to net zero by 2050. So net zero, or carbon neutrality, just means that the amount of carbon that we emit or that we put out is balanced by the same amount of carbon that we can take out of the atmosphere. This is where we talk about things like offsets, or we talk about carbon sequestration, which means grabbing carbon out of the atmosphere and sinking it into the ground or into other structures. So being net zero means that either you're not producing any carbon because you're running fully on renewable energy, or because whatever carbon you are emitting, you're also capturing with, for example, green walls or certain types of wetlands, or you're actually paying to offset them, but you're not really neutral then. Next slide. What we're also increasingly looking for is net positive buildings. And what's really exciting is this particular example, which you can look up just by Googling the Confluence, Alberta. One of our member institutions, the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, has been involved in the building of what is currently being built possibly as the most sustainable home on the planet. So it's built in Alberta, and it was designed and built by SATE's Green Building Technologies program and a private sector manufacturer called Woodpeck European Timber Framing. And so they work together, SATE worked together with this industry to design and build this home, which is net positive. What does that mean? Not only is it neutral, but it actually uses less energy than what it creates to put into the grid, if you will. So the house generates electricity through solar panels and other things. It doesn't use any, so everything that it generates goes back into the grid. And so today we're really here to understand the role of the trades, of all types of trades, next slide please, in this move to net zero. And there are so many unique and interesting ways to do this. I'm going to highlight a couple that are not related to our speakers, just so that you can see, if you're here with a trade that's not in the construction, for example, then you'll still see that there are very concrete things that you can do. For example, there's an approach to reducing global warming, or the heating of the atmosphere, which is primarily the problem that we're seeing, is the increasing temperatures, which are making our winters milder and our summers hotter. There's a thing called the albedo effect, which is when the heat that we're getting from the sun gets reflected back. Next slide, please. And so we see, for example, a new approach to reducing this heating effect that was developed at Purdue University with a new kind of paint, which evidence shows is 97% as efficient as air conditioning. So for us to know this, for the trades to know that there is an alternative to air conditioning that could be used to reduce the heating effect, that's very powerful. And that's something that we want to bring to Canada and bring to the construction industry and sector in Canada. For example, in Los Angeles, they're actually painting their roads with this paint, which actually acts like air conditioning for the city because it reflects the heat back into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Keep going, please. So where do our emissions come from in Canada? You probably are aware, we talk a lot about the oil and gas sector, but of course, emissions come from all over the place. You can see that buildings produce 12% of the emissions in Canada. And then, of course, some of what we do with buildings also uses oil and gas, uses electricity includes transportation on campuses. So in fact, our share of emissions is actually quite high. This is data from the Canadian government. Next slide, please. You'll see the sources that are more a worldwide or global emissions. And again, you can see the same number, 12% for commercial and residential buildings. But you can see that electricity is very high. The concrete industry, which we use in the building sector, is very, very high as well. So the emissions that we produce are significant. Next slide, please. And so what we need to do, again, this is just another way of looking at the various sources of emissions like iron and steel, which we use in our buildings, cement, which we use in our buildings, etc. So we can understand that even within the industry sector, many of those emissions actually tie right back into the construction industry. Next slide, please. We'll skip to the next slide. I want to make sure to leave enough time for my colleagues, and the next slide too. Thank you. So some examples, some wonderful examples from the trades that we offer in our colleges and institutes. Landscaping can have an enormous effect, a positive effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and even capturing or sequestering the carbon that's been emitted. So it's really important to integrate these green concepts into landscaping and use strategies like trees and xeriscaping to make sure that we are doing the very best that we can to make sure landscaping doesn't add to the problem and in fact becomes part of the solution. And the image you see there is a rooftop. So again, transforming the way that we build buildings, the way that we roof our buildings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and capture those that happen. Next slide, please. Welding is another one that has a lot of carbon associated with it. And you can see here that there's quite a number of ways that we can adjust the way that we do the welding, both in the embodied and the operational side, to reduce the emissions and still have a very robust and essential welding industry, but taking action to reduce those GHGs that are associated with it. Next slide, please. Automotive. We know very well that electric vehicles are the future. The slide on the right, the chart on the right, can show you where Canada is at with respect to the emissions associated with transportation. And you can see all of the other countries that are on this slide, which are highly industrialized countries, much like ours, Germany, the UK, France, Norway. And you can see that all of them, except Canada, have succeeded in beginning, or in some cases, dramatically lowering their emissions. So again, the whole automotive trade has a big pivot to do in Canada. Next slide, please. Culinary arts is yet another example. We saw how much agriculture can contribute to our emissions. So there are a whole host of ways that our culinary arts programs can also address their carbon footprint, how they can reduce and how they can upskill and green skill new graduates of our culinary programs to be ready for a net zero economy by 2050. Next slide, please. So now I'm really excited to hand over the microphone, the speaker, to colleagues who are going to speak from their perspective about this work of greening the trades. We'll be hearing from an electrical perspective, a carpentry perspective, and an HVAC perspective. If you do have questions or comments, please do put them into the webinar chat. We hope to have time for Q&A at the end, and some of our panelists could be answering questions when they're not presenting. So please put your comments and your questions in the chat. Next slide, please. And I'm really delighted to hand over the microphone next to Sam Whitehawk, who is joining us from the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology, where he is Associate Dean of Trades and Industrial, who's going to share some interesting and important perspectives. So Sam, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over the microphone to you, and you can ask to have the slides advanced as you are ready.
All right. Thank you, Judy, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Sam Whitehawk, currently Associate Dean at SIIT in the Trades and Industrial Department. I'm also from Cody First Nation here in Saskatchewan, which is Treaty 4 territory, although I work, live, and play in Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6. And so I'm grateful to be here with everyone and to present a little bit of what I'm doing and my experience in the trades, and as well as what SIIT is up to. I want to share a quick story, though, about my first house. And you guys probably remember buying your first house. We bought our first house, my wife and I, and it was terrible. It was small. It had lots of issues. It was listed as only being 60 years old, and then we found out it was over 100 years old. And as you can imagine, it was not a very energy efficient house. We had lots of issues, and my electrical bill was twice as high as my in-laws' house, who had a house twice the size of my own. And so, that kind of created some frustration for my wife and I as we were considering, why are we having so many issues with this particular house? And so the issues were too many to name today, but as we built our next house, we wanted to build with better principles in mind. So we built with some code-built specs that we knew of at the time, which were good, but we still didn't end up solving for comfort. We figured out how to get lower utility bills to a certain degree, but we didn't figure out the comfort aspect of it. And so we're currently in the process of designing and building a home for our family, primarily around accessibility needs for my daughter. But one of the things that we're doing is primarily trying to build a house using net zero ready principles. And many of the things that I've learned, and I'm going to share a little bit today, but it's most of what you will be hearing throughout this presentation. So for me, that was part of my journey, even just to getting to where I am today. One thing I also did mention in the introduction is I'm a Red Seal journeyperson electrician by trade. So for me, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about green housing, green building, net zero, everything that we're talking about is because when we strive for this, we are building homes that are not only more sustainable, which means they can last a lot longer when you solve for the issues that we're trying to solve for, but you're also building healthier and safer homes for communities, so that you can actually live in a comfortable home, but not only comfortable, healthy in the long term, so that the air that you're breathing is better, and that there are not long-term health effects. And so one of the things that I'm learning is that when we strive for green building or net zero building, we're actually solving for sustainability, health, and comfort as well. And so you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. Whether you're striving to hit one or the other, you will inevitably hit both. And so that is one of the reasons why I'm passionate about working at SIIT, is that we do construction and trades programs all throughout the province of Saskatchewan. And it is a privilege and honor to be able to do this kind of work with the team that I have in our department. And so as we think about why we want to do green building and pursue this, is because there are some benefits to that. When we think of many of our First Nations communities, one of the issues that we're starting to see across the province is that many of the homes are unhealthy. They are unsafe for our elders, for our children, for our communities. Many reasons for this, but one of the biggest is poor construction methods that didn't factor in sustainability, green building, efficiency. So one of the things that we're doing and striving for in terms of helping to build healthier, more sustainable, energy efficient green homes is we're starting to pilot a program this year. And so we have a program called the Residential Renovation and Construction Program at SIIT. We've been doing it for a number of years in First Nations communities across our entire province. And one of the things that we're doing this year is we're renewing or renovating this program. So we want to deliver essentially a green rack program where we're taking principles of construction that we already use and deliver and modifying it to ensure that these principles that we're already learning about and talking about today are implemented into this program. And so we're going to be piloting that this year. And again, the reason is because we're striving for a number of things. We want, ideally, we want to get to net zero ready homes, but we also want to solve the issues of mold, of poor indoor air quality, and the health effects that are hindering our communities. And so with this RAC program, so this is just in concept right now, and we have the ability to develop it and deliver probably within the next year. We're going to be doing that, but we also have a number of proposals out that we're hoping will be approved so that we can revamp a number of our programs, but also to start new programs that focus on green building practices. Because what we're currently doing, we have influence and relationships with all of our communities across the province, as well as a majority of our cities. And we want to be able to deliver and be ahead of the game in delivering green building training. So another thing that we're trying to do, and we talked about, what does it mean to strive for net zero? But one of the things that we get to do as a community, when we are striving for net zero, like I said, it benefits our communities. And so as we, at SIT, we primarily exist for education, training, and employment of Indigenous people in Saskatchewan. Not exclusively, but that is what we are able to do. And so as we strive for net zero, we're actually helping our communities all across our province. And so that's what's exciting about pursuing this. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing how this particular green RAC program that we're delivering will turn out, but also future programs that will focus on healthy, sustainable homes for our communities. The other thing I want to talk about, green building. And so as we prepare for net zero future, one of the things that we're learning, and I'm glad there are multiple trades and people within different sectors within the industry, is because the truth is we all need to be on the same page and we all have to work together. And so with me and my background as an electrician, if just the electricians are really committed to this, but the carpenters or the plumbers or the architects are not, that's not going to be a sustainable approach. It's not going to achieve the targets that we're striving for. But when we truly do communicate and collaborate across all our trades, but not only our trades in construction, but everyone working on design, then we can actually strive towards hitting net zero or net zero ready homes. And I should clarify that distinction. Net zero ready really just means the opportunity to get to net zero or net zero plus, as we've talked about. So the implementation of solar panels, as I'll speak about. So some of the practices that I've been learning about in my own personal desire to build a home for our family, as well as what I've been researching in terms of the programs we develop at SIT, can be summarized here. When we talk about a house, although the principles do apply to the commercial and the industrial sectors, we all live in homes. And so these are some basic principles that can help with healthier, sustainable, and moving towards a net zero future. And so if you notice, just right from the top down to the bottom, starting with renewable generation, so solar panels, implementing those, that's something that we can do to generate power on site. But one of the most important things when it comes to housing is the exterior of the house. It is the building envelope. And so you'll notice a phrase on the left side, it says continuous insulation. That's something that's incredibly important to strive towards net zero. But there are a number of other features. I'm just going to breeze through them quickly, but talking about fresh air in, fresh air out, utilizing new technologies that are on the market that are getting better every year, like heat pump, water heaters, like heat pumps, which will take outdoor air and then help actually through glycol, and I'm not an expert in this, but then can provide heating and cooling in your house in a much more energy efficient way, as well as charging for electric vehicles, which we'll talk about. So the next thing, when it comes to my background as an electrician, I've been off the tools for about 7 years now, but I know the industry changes fast and is getting better and better at becoming more efficient. However, one of the things, like I talked about, when it comes to design, architects have a huge role in preparing for net zero and green building. And so as we look at this particular slide, electricity is great, electric lighting, we all use it, but if we can design houses around passive lighting, around natural lighting, that will make a huge difference in our homes, where we're able to not rely on so much electric lights, and we can utilize passive lighting or natural lighting in our home designs. The next thing that you'll notice when it comes to the electrical industry, we've all probably throughout our years have made this change from incandescent light bulbs to compact fluorescent lamps, and now LED lighting is huge, and it is a game changer. And so I'm just going to summarize this quickly. But if you look at just making the switch to LED lighting, not only do LEDs last a lot longer, they generate, they use much less power, but there's also a savings across the board, the lifespan of that light. And so by implementing LEDs, there is much more opportunity for savings, for using less energy, and it's just much better overall in making that switch. And so that's where our industry is slowly going. And it's amazing the technology that is coming out. It changes so quickly. But that's exciting to know that we have better technology. We can make those changes in our homes today to be using better lighting. But when it comes to new construction, we can also install LED lighting, which will make a big difference for us. The next thing is that appliances. There are many things that we can do around appliances. And again, that comes to working with your entire team, whoever that is, whether that's your builder, your interior designer. Many through the Energy Star label, many appliances now are striving for these targets, and you can compare and contrast which appliance will be better for you. And using and choosing much more energy efficient appliances will help us reach our larger goals much quicker. And so a lot of that comes down to when you're purchasing, when you're designing, when you're installing, to put in much more energy efficient appliances. And when you plan further in advance, it's going to be easier for you to make that transition if you're not able to buy that particular appliance up front. And so the next example, when it comes to different systems like installing solar, geothermal, wind power generators, planning up front for the electrical work to ensure that the chargers are there, that your house has the service and the capacity to handle this kind of technology is incredibly important. And so again, that's part of pre-planning with the entire team on board to know that, hey, if we are going to install solar panels, we are going to need conduit, we're going to need a path back to the mechanical room, we're going to need space in that mechanical room for the batteries that we're going to install. And so all this has to be planned ahead of time. And so even if you're not able to do that when you install the panels or build the house right away, if you plan for it in advance, if you already have space for the batteries, if you already have a conduit, you're already designing your roof around what is best and how to position your house on your lot, all those things will help towards a future of installing renewable energy such as solar panels. And then the last thing we mentioned, that electric vehicles are the future that you see more and more in the market these days. And so in your house, if you're going to purchase an EV, you will need a charger for it so that you can charge. And again, planning for that ahead of time, because in most of our garages built before today, you don't have that. So you need an electrician to do a lot of work of climbing around in your attic or going in your crawl space to install that. But now, with the knowledge that we have, we can plan this ahead of time and ensure that we have charging stations and things like that ready to go. So that's what I just wanted to share briefly about my experience with SIT, my experience as an electrician, and I'm grateful again for the chance to speak with you today.
Wow, thank you very much, Sam. That's so interesting. And not being a person in the trades, I was blown away by, I knew that there were many ways that your work impacted on climate change, but I had no idea just how comprehensive and holistic it really is. And I really like the point you made about sustainable homes being the homes for happy, healthy people as well, and that those two things really have to go together, which I think really is great because the SDGs are a holistic thing as well. You can't have climate action without reducing inequalities and without good health and well-being and without taking care of the land and the water. So thank you so much for that. And now we're going to move on to Jill all from Canada College, who's going to share learnings and insights from the carpentry sector. Over to you, Jill.
Trying to get unmuted there. Okay. My name is Jill Rydell. I'm a carpenter first and foremost, and I teach at Canada College the apprenticeship, so level 1, 2, and 3. And I'm delighted to be here today and part of this this webinar. So as I started to think about building green, it brought me back to actually this first slide is a picture of me in the mid 80s. And I'm on a job site. It was a wastewater treatment plant. So production was pretty important there. When I went to school, however, I was introduced to the green building concept with an R2000 house. And I learned a lot when I think it was my level 2 apprenticeship. But when I went back onto the job site and was sharing this newfound knowledge, my colleagues just they weren't into that, and they almost laughed me off the site and said, no, this isn't going to happen. But here we are today. Next slide, please. So I'm reflecting on the evolution of construction from my eyes, really. And as I said before, production was number one. Let's get it done. And, we're all going to make money. Talking to my students, I'd always say what I've noticed from when I started in the trades to now is a huge shift and a huge change on safety in the job site. Statistics tell a story. We had to change it because there were too many accidents, and I think we recognized that the laws changed and attitudes changed, and it took a long time, and it's still a struggle in some cases, particularly more in the residential sector. But we made it happen, and we were capable. So as I'm, thinking about the environmental issues on the job site, and our climate is definitely telling a story, and it's been there and we've known about it for years, but we're starting to really see the effects now. And so I think a lot of people are going, okay, maybe we really do need to look at this seriously. So codes need to change. Code built houses residentially are the number one built house. They are built by code, but our codes need to get a little wee bit tighter there. And again, it comes down to attitude. It is a journey. All of it's a journey, but we can get there, and education is so critically important. That's why I'm so excited to be a part of this team that's developing some material for instructors. Next slide, please. So this slide I was looking at, and when I read that construction accounts for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, 40% of total waste, and 12% of water use worldwide. Like that's a pretty bold statement. I had no idea really when I was starting to dig into this. And I mean, residential buildings alone, again, globally, 24% of energy consumption and 18% of greenhouse gases. That's a really bold statement. So we really do need to start taking this a little more seriously and really get the education out there. I'm going to focus on residential carpentry with my next few slides. Next slide, please. So operational carbon. So basically, that's once we're in the house, and we were talking about that. Judy had gone through that earlier. So how do we build differently? Contractors have been doing that for years. We have the science. We understand the science. It's implementing the science. As I had mentioned, the R2000 homes that I learned about, I mean, honestly, 35 years ago, and it has evolved, and we've evolved into net zero and passive houses that we have contractors today doing this, but we need more education, and particularly with the people that are doing the trades. All the science in the world is great, but if the individuals that are actually putting these buildings together aren't on board, it's not going to make too big of a difference. Next slide, please. So looking at net zero, one of the first houses built in Canada in 2004 was a house just to see, how it would work, and it did work. Looking at minimizing the air leakage, so sealing up the house tightly, eliminating or reducing the thermal bridging, which is a path for heat to travel. Usually you're framing within your wall. Increasing your R values, looking at your windows, going with a high efficient triple pane window, how the house is positioned, I mean, my furnace does not come on as long as it's sunny out in the winter months, and it's because it's positioned properly. So you're getting free heat from the sun, but in the summer months you also have that shade too. And then all of the energy efficient appliances that have to go. So it's not just one thing; it's the entire project. Next slide, please. How can we achieve more insulation? It's again the building envelope. So if we start from the ground up and look at underneath your slabs, if we can increase and even start to insulate the slabs in some cases, looking at maybe an R10 in our slabs, and then below grade, which would be your basement walls on R20. Above grade, which is the walls, right, on R40, and your roof R60 to R80. Those are very achievable, but I mean, let's face it, we the cost of it too. So making sure that the contractors are educated, and then they can then educate not only their workers but their clients is pretty will be good. There's also a lot of different ways that you can achieve that. As you can see in that one picture, the wall cavity, you can only put so much insulation in a wall cavity. Traditional 2x6 wall, you only have 5.5 inches of airspace in there to fill with insulation. So like I say, there are a lot of different ideas and processes on how to get that increased insulation in your wall system. And by doing a little research and finding what you think is best, we start there. Next slide, please. So a problem or an opportunity. I think it's pretty exciting for builders if you look at that, and if we can achieve the net zero that we want for builders that are still building code houses residentially, and start to understand different processes and educate their clients. I think it's a pretty exciting time, and I think there's a lot of, a lot of opportunities. Next slide, please. So embodied carbon. Now this one here is probably, I think, one of the easier issues to solve, but is not thought of as much. You think of the house and building differences, but you think of embodied carbon, the building materials that you're using and how they're manufactured and how they get to you, and how they're the transportation, and then the construction itself. So if we look at that, and can we make changes, putting a little thought into that, and again, educating people, we can definitely make a pretty big impact, I think, fairly quickly. Next slide, please. Well, next slide. I think, okay. So if we look at different products and different materials, we have the internet now, and research is at your fingertips, and you can start going through that. In some cases, about 80% of recyclable plastic from Halifax is reused, and synthetic timber. We've been using composite boards for decks for quite some time now. So alternative methods that are recyclable, and we start using them more, again, is going to go in a positive direction. Next slide, please. We look at insulation. There is a ton of different types of insulation out there. I like the blue jean insulation. I did use that once, and if anyone has installed the pink insulation versus the blue jean insulation, it's much nicer to use the blue jean insulation. But there's also, and it's 100% recyclable. Cellulose from recycled paper, it's blown in, again, 100% recyclable. So if we can find products that are 100% recyclable and they achieve what we're looking for, then we can make better choices in the materials we're using to construct the buildings. Next slide, please. Reconsider. A lot of times you'll look at, buildings such as this and tear it down and build new. Well, if you look at that building, small cottage, all of the energy that went into building that, probably 60 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. And so reimagine, and instead of tearing that down, let's renovate it. And so, is that a better opportunity? Yeah, you're lengthening the life of that building, all of the energy that was used to build that one in the first place, and it's retrofitted, and this building's going to end up being a home for the client. So that is a discussion that totally can come from the carpenter right to the client, and have the discussions, which is going to be more economical, that's always there, but also which is a better choice for the environment. And so renovations is a better choice than building new. Next slide, please. Okay, so waste, what about demolition waste and diversion? Again, you go onto a residential job site and the big dumpster is there and everything goes into it. You know, if we stop and plan properly and then rethink everything, you know, the commercial construction is regulated, so source separation does happen, but residential still is not there. Next slide, please. So it's all in the planning, and everybody has to be involved. Sam mentioned before, if you don't have all your trades buying into this concept, you know, it's not going to work. So the job site planning is so important. I mean, today, again, as I had mentioned previously, safety has evolved. You have job site safety toolbox talks and working at heights training, and you know, a lot of safety training, and that has changed and made a super positive impact on our wonderful industry. But what about a job site environmental plan before you start those projects? You have to have excellent leadership. You have to have buy-in. So in order to get buy-in, if you include your workers and say, look, this is what we want to do, listen to them, respect everyone's opinion, and come up with the best plan to run that job site right from start to finish. And I think you'll find, and I'm noticing this myself, the younger generation is already there. And, you know, we have our millennials on job sites right now. They're totally into this, and trust me, they're going to have the plans. They have the knowledge already. So really want to listen to your workers. When you're pricing out for a project, you have to let the sub trades that are bidding that it's going to be a green job site. And so in order to, you know, you have to factor that in and understand that, and train everyone that steps on site of that that job site. Signage, simple things, you know, consider getting rid of your when possible, your compressors and generators, and go to all battery power tools. It's way nicer using cordless tools, and I think anyone out there that, you know, has made that switch definitely would agree with. Not only are you saving on labor, but also you're not using those gas burning generators and compressors. Carpooling, I think we all know about carpooling. It is better for sure. But I think I find that, you know, going to job sites, everyone likes to bring their own vehicles. So they have their own little place to have their lunch or whatever. But again, start thinking differently and reconsider, possibly instead of 3 or 4 trucks showing up, you know, cut her down 50% to 2 trucks showing up. Next slide, please. So again, that dumpster, that picture, I really relate to the one on the upper right-hand corner, because that is a renovation job, and you see everything in there from solid wood to cardboards and drywall and everything else that might have come out of this building, all hitting the landfill. So if we can again start thinking, does it have to go into the landfill? Landfill costs too. It does cost, so you can save on that. What can be recycled, reused, redirected? Is there casing and base or trims in that maybe you're not going to use on this job site, but can it be repurposed somewhere else? Working with the right suppliers, you know, what are their return policies? If you have a square of siding left over, can that be returned, or is that going to sit in your yard and try and, you know, reuse it some other time down the road, which honestly is probably going to end up in the landfill. I like the quote, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And I can really, you know, thinking about moving the construction sites to green, we do have to think differently. Next slide, please. So it's not just about net zero or indigenization, but this is definitely close to me. 50% of the population that previously, I don't know that I'd say excluded, but certainly wasn't considered for construction. Can you guess what that is? Next slide, please. If someone, and I've been asked this question quite often, what as a woman working in the trades, swinging a hammer, what have I seen evolve in the last 40 years? And I mean, if you asked me that 5 years ago, I'd still say not much. I mean, I teach, well, and how many female students do I get in my classes? And I would say not much. There might be one, maybe two in a good year, but that has begun to change. And so when I reflect back, thinking about that, we have the colleges are fantastic for outsourcing funding, and we've been running pre-apprenticeship programs for women the past I'd say 3 or 4 years, and those programs are successful. As a woman working in the trade, you have to have the support from your family and friends and, encouragement. I tell my students, tell everyone what you want to do. I loved carpentry. I grew up in my dad's workshop. That was my playground. But considering that as a path or an occupation at that time wasn't a consideration. And I mean, I guess it was due to my being a bit bullheaded and bugging my dad to let me work on his job site. He didn't really want his daughter on his job site, quite frankly, but he overlooked that. And I think a little coaching and persistence from my mother, I started my trade with him. I did join the Carpenters Union, and I worked industrial as well, and I loved both. My father said to me last year, I often wondered if I was wasting your time by letting you work on my job sites. And I said, what do you think? You taught me the trade, you taught me how to build, you taught me how to teach. He was an excellent teacher, excellent mentor. And we were in his shop building, and I now teach him things actually in cabinet making. So I've had a fantastic career, and if anyone out there needs, and there's a skilled trade shortage, we know that. And if you open your mind up and consider, wow, my family member or my cousin or my so and so, I think she'd do well in trades. Encourage her. Right? Encourage her, and then help for that opportunity. And our colleges are doing a great job. Skills Ontario, Skills Canada are doing a great job. What else did I want to say? I wanted to make sure I said everything with this. Oh, social media. Social media has made a very positive impact on more women getting into the trades. My level 2s, I had 4 women in my class. And they are so talented and so great. They're going to be great carpenters. Anyway, thank you. I'm going to end it with that. And thank you for letting me speak here today. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Jill. Again, so inspiring. I really, really love the way you said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Well, we know things need to change, and everybody has to contribute to that change. And I also really liked how you pointed out that your role can be to educate your clients. How important it is, because who do they come into contact with? I recently got a great education from a plumber that I called to work on my sink. And, I was telling him about how I'm dumping this stuff down the sink. And he was, I don't know, he probably went to Algonquin College here in Ottawa. And he stopped, a young man, like you said, a millennial. He stopped, he took some time, and he explained to me why I should never dump that toxic stuff down the sink. And he actually talked about the effect of that on the water and on the pipes and everything. And I probably embarrassed him. I thanked him like 10 times. I asked him, how does he know this? And I was so grateful that he took the time to tell me that. So he made a big difference right there on the front line. So thank you, Jill, for being there as a mentor to women and inspiring more people, not only to get into carpentry, but to do it in the green way. It was really exciting. And I just wanted to point out to the speakers that there are questions being put in the chat, some of which I believe you should be able to answer about insulation and about other things to do with the RAC program in Saskatchewan. So please keep your eye on the chat and feel free to answer those if you can. And I'm going to invite our last but definitely not least. I've had the pleasure of hearing Matthew speak before, and I know you're going to be in for a treat. Matthew's joining us from Vancouver Island. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that vote of confidence so much. I've really enjoyed listening to Sam and Jill's presentations. I think they're wonderful. Lots and lots of food for thought. My presentation is called Opportunities for Climate Change Solutions and Decolonization. I am fortunate, proud, and privileged in many ways. I'd like to acknowledge that I am very fortunate to be joining you all today from Salt Spring Island, BC, on the unceded and traditional territory of the Hul'qumi'num and Tsimshian speaking peoples. I'm employed by Vancouver Island University, and VIU would like to acknowledge and thank the Snuneymuxw, the Snuneymuxw, the Kawatsan, and Tulayman peoples on whose traditional lands we teach, learn, research, live, and share knowledge. I am very proud to be an IP Red Seal certified refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic. It's been a key in my life from which all other successes in Canada have been enjoyed. I really like sharing my knowledge with people, and I like supporting my community, providing efficient comfort. I am privileged to be employed and supported by Vancouver Island University and the Faculty of Trades and Applied Technology. VIU was again named one of BC's top employers for 2023 this year. So what is RACM? RACM is an acronym that I struggled with when I got into education because I've known it my whole life as HVAC, and the R tends to be silent. But put simply, RACM is HVAC. RACM is the acronym that the Skilled Trades BC uses, and I believe all the other provincial trades training authorities use. It's refrigeration, air conditioning, mechanic. But in colloquial terms and internationally, it's HVAC, and it's probably what you know my trade as: heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. Now that we know what we're all talking about, we can learn a little more. This slide is revelatory to me. When I was working on this presentation, I wanted to explain to everybody what a good job HVAC is, how it meets the hierarchy of needs according to Maslow. You know, personally, it's a good job that provides you with enough earnings to survive in today's high cost of living, high inflation world. There are many diverse employment options within the HVAC field. There is love and belonging in the form of friendship and collegial relationships within the HVAC field. There's a lot of training and professional development on different equipment and techniques. We're all kind of in the trenches together, and you feel like you're really part of a elite special trade. That knowledge is wonderful when you realize how specialized your training is. You have the ability to improve your self-esteem, and you can value yourself for your contributions to society. Please don't advance the slide just yet, Sandra. It's wonderful, as I was just mentioning, to be able to help people feel safe and secure and comfortable in their homes. So this was really a great reflection for me on how this trade meets Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But it was recently revealed to me, and to my amazement, that Maslow himself co-opted this knowledge, this hierarchy of needs, from First Nations perspective, the Blackfoot Nation, I believe in particular, and he changed it a little bit. This was originally not about individual self-actualization, but it was knowledge that was intended as community actualization. When one person rises, everybody else rises as well. What's the saying? A rising tide floats all boats. The work that I do as a tradesman is about community actualization. I'm so proud to have installed over 300 heat pumps as a contractor on Salt Spring Island. Pretty small community, and that's a large percentage. I enjoy encountering my customers in the grocery store and at the gas station. I enjoy talking about the technology that I've shared with them, and I really enjoy hearing them rave about their reduced hydroelectric bills and their increased comfort. I was really fortunate to finally get to install one in my dad's house. He just lives down the road about 2 months ago. And he calls me to check in, but lately he's been calling to rave about his hydro bills. And I just know that, my dad and his partner are comfortable. It makes me feel so good. So HVAC employment is not about meeting Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's about meeting the community's hierarchy of needs. And that's this is a game changer when we think about it. Thanks so much for sharing that with me, Sandra. Next slide, please. HVAC is an essential trade. Residentially, we provide the living, breathing heart of your home, if you will. Your heat pump, your furnace, they're the heart of your home. They're one of the largest energy users in your home, and that equipment is what directly relates to the operational cost of your home. We all need heating in Canada, and cooling is also becoming essential. The recent heat waves that we've experienced have really exposed our vulnerabilities to rising temperatures. And there are a lot of discussions around the physical need for cooling becoming more and more necessary in our homes. HVAC has a V in it, and that V stands for ventilation. And that directly relates to the air quality of our built environments. New homes generally gas off volatile organic compounds for at least 2 years, and often much longer, depending on the selection of the materials you use. And so, it's negligent to allow a family to move into a new home and have them feel that pride of ownership and that great experience, and know that they're breathing poor air as a result of that new home. It's very important that we have fresh, clean, healthy air in our homes and our workplaces and other places as well. We also have to deal with other contaminants, things like radon, the silent killer that nobody talks about. Second leading cause of lung cancer in British Columbia, radon. So HVAC is really about providing a safe, comfortable, efficient home where we can continue to feel secure in our houses. HVAC also maintains what we call the cold chain. The cold chain is that refrigerated environment from farm to table, from the farmer's field or the food producer's location, transported to the grocery store or the market, and then purchased and brought home and stored in our refrigerators. The cold chain is so important to preventing food waste and allowing us to have healthy, nutritious food with the least amount of embedded carbon and full consumption. It's really important. Global food waste, if it was a country, would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. If you think about all the energy and carbon that's put into producing it, to let it rot on the store shelf or be thrown away at the end of all that is, criminal. And let's not forget that our global population is increasing all the time, and in fact has literally doubled in my lifetime. HVAC, and refrigeration is going to continue to be ever more important. HVAC also supports medicine and treatment. The latest pandemic, I say latest pandemic, I hope we don't have another one anytime soon, but HVAC's contribution to solutions to the pandemic were revealed along the lines of vaccine storage and transportation, and also improvements in our indoor air quality. I was recently under the weather over the weekend, and one of the only things that brought me relief was a glass of water with ice in it. And in fact, mechanical refrigeration was invented by a doctor, Dr. John Gorey, in the mid 1800s, the 1850s, in an effort to provide his patients better care. So we owe ice in the mechanical form to patient care and recovery. It is also a very essential trade when it comes to our industry. The mining, forestry, and fishery industries all rely on various forms of heating, process heating, process cooling, refrigeration, and freezing to be able to continue being efficient and productive. I'm personally not a huge fan of liquefied natural gas. I don't think it's as clean as we're led to believe. However, it does have its place, and certainly supplants other more harmful fossil fuels in other locations. You cannot liquefy natural gas without cooling it. It has to be cooled extensively to liquefy and transport it. Of course, there's research and development efforts and space exploration efforts, which rely on clean rooms and climate-controlled environments that all rely on HVAC. You can't talk about Canada culturally without talking about hockey. And of course, it's pretty hard to have a skating rink without refrigeration. Same for curling rinks. Sliding sports, the Winter Olympics were held in Vancouver in 2010, and a long time ago in Calgary back in 1988, and those involved a lot of refrigeration as well as aquatics. So I'm just touching on the more commonly known areas where HVAC is essential, but I have a hard time not seeing heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration everywhere I look. And I saw many aspects of it in my co-presenters' slides as well. So there's a lot of places where you'll find it. This is a moment for everybody to reflect personally. I hope and expect that the vast majority, if not all of you, had a comfortable night's sleep last night in a warm, safe home. I'm hoping that you had a delicious breakfast that was safe to eat and conveyed to you in a safe manner. I expect you are breathing reasonably good air. And these are things that we all generally take for granted. But there are things that are brought to you through refrigeration, air conditioning, mechanic work. We don't all enjoy these necessities equally, though. And it's important to pull yourself out of your comfort zone and maybe consider, you know, the implications of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. So for all the great things that the HVAC trade brings us, it also has harmed us collectively and will continue to do so. We need to modify our training and our techniques and improve upon them to reduce that harm and mitigate those effects. You're probably most familiar with refrigerants as it relates to our ozone layer. Back in the 80s, it was discovered that, or late 70s, it was discovered that the common refrigerant of the day had a lot of chlorine in it that was harmful to the ozone layer. And the nations of the world got together in about 1985 and signed on to what was known as the Montreal Protocol in an effort to reduce ozone depleting refrigerants. And I'm happy to report that that effort has been, for the most part, fairly successful. And they are reporting that the ozone layer is recovering. And they hope to see the ozone layer recovered to its previous levels around 2050. I think that's remarkable for a couple of reasons. It parallels our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's also an example of the nations of the world working together cooperatively. And so there's some silver lining to be taken from that. They're, for the most part, eliminated at this point. However, the refrigerants that we're using now to replace the previous ones still have their harmful effects. They're now discovering that a number of them contain what are called per and polyfluorinated substances. These are persistent chemicals. They're known as forever chemicals. They don't go away, and they are endocrine disruptors. When they contaminate our environments, they eventually make their way back to our bodies, and we don't want that. Also, the replacement and retrofit refrigerants that have been brought around to replace the ozone depleting refrigerants are typically very potent greenhouse gases. For instance, R134A, which was a hydrofluorocarbon. It had no chlorine molecule. It was brought in to replace the original Freon. One ton of R134A is the equivalent of 1,300 tons of carbon dioxide. And it's one of the low global warming potential refrigerants. Of course, there's a lot of material used: steel, copper, aluminum, rare earth minerals that we need to consider when we're installing and replacing refrigerants. Those have trickle-down effects, you know, as it relates to the mining industry and where we get those resources from. Of course, as wonderful as our products are, they're generally all powered by electricity, and depending on where they're installed, that electricity may be fossil fuel sourced. So we're contributing to emissions. Next slide, please. The solutions to these problems, generally, we need to be accountable as HVAC tradesmen. We need to make sure that the refrigerants we're using stay in the equipment we have them in, or in our cylinders. We need to work very hard to prevent them from being released to the environment, and that requires proper training, proper accountability, and professional attitude. We try to teach best practices for sizing equipment, installing and servicing it, so that it's appropriate for the use and can enjoy a long lifespan. There is legislation out there. There are regulations around reporting and repairing leaks. but there's no teeth in that legislation, and unfortunately, a lot of it gets unreported. We do have new options for refrigerants like ammonia. Even though it has some toxicity, it's not a potent greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is an excellent refrigerant and has a global warming potential of 1. In other words, 1 ton of carbon dioxide equals 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And there are hydrocarbon refrigerants like propane and butane that are very effective and don't persist in the atmosphere. I'm a big fan of evaporative cooling and other passive options because they don't use as much energy. They don't have these harmful effects built into them. And certainly any opportunities for things like green roofs, things like orientation of the building, the glazing, shading and reflective surfaces are all to be considered. Collaboration is also key. There are a lot of sub-trades on a job. There's education that needs to happen between the refrigeration, air conditioning mechanics and the general contractors. We need to work within codes. BC is very fortunate. We've got a great energy code built into our building codes. Understanding what's available is really important, and if it's driven by designers and architects, then it's a lot easier to sell to the contractors and the customers. Managing expectations, talking about capital costs versus operational costs, give us the opportunity to sell heat pumps and energy efficient solutions that are a little more expensive up front, but pay for themselves over the long haul. And the last point there touches on respecting the diversity of viewpoints, finding common ground, recognizing that your knowledge doesn't necessarily have all the answers. It's really important to maintain the awareness of the solutions that you have, the services that you provide, and consider how your work impacts people on a larger scale. Here's some pictures of homes that have suffered from a lack of proper heating and cooling or indoor air quality, and it can really affect you if you've got these problems in your home. So HVAC technicians need to be aware of the bigger picture that they provide, and step out of your comfort zone. Recognize that you're impacting people in their homes, not just in your day-to-day world. Specifically, and this is drawn from these statistics are taken from a great website called drawdown.org. Here are some really big picture solutions that relate to refrigeration, air conditioning mechanics. You can see the numbers there. That's in gigatons of CO2 sequestered. And what I really note from this is that even though building retrofitting and net zero buildings are a huge part of this, they pale in comparison to the numbers that we're talking about around refrigeration. Food waste being the number one, and refrigerant management being the second. Alternative refrigerants, building automation systems, smart thermostats, district heating, and high efficiency heat pumps all have a really large impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, very large. I don't want to overlook the ways that refrigeration and air conditioning tradespersons can support efforts to decolonize our communities. Sam touched on it quite a bit, and I've been exposed to some pretty horrific housing in the First Nations in my local area. There's so much around that we haven't considered. You know, we enjoy our comfortable, secure, safe homes that have been built properly to code that we own, but First Nations do not enjoy that same right. And you know, that recognizing that and sharing the knowledge of refrigeration, air conditioning, mechanic trade is just one of the ways that we can reach out and start the conversation that is long overdue with our local First Nations. So personally, I have enjoyed a lot of insight and contemplation in participating in the faculty training module project with CICAN. I'm privileged to have satisfying, gainful employment, and I think most HVAC technicians would say that. I can personally attest that most of my personal development has stemmed from the fact that I've had a safe, secure house for 15 years. My family heritage is one of settler occupation and colonization, and rather than, you know, hide in shame from that, I can just acknowledge it and start looking at embracing new ways of understanding and reconciling with folks that have lived here for thousands of years. You know, reconciliation is a process that requires personal honesty and willingness to change. And I'd love it if everybody listening to me now took the time to start that journey themselves if they haven't already. You know, again, Rackham contributes many ways to climate change solutions, but our specialty is safe, comfortable housing, and that should be our first priority, extending that to everybody. I've included a slide here. When it's distributed later, I encourage you to take a look at this slide and click on some of these links. There's some really great information there that will keep your wheels turning. I kind of hurried this up a little bit. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and hopefully we've got a few minutes for questions and answers.
We have a very few minutes, but we do, and thank you, Matthew, for that. Again, totally inspirational, learned some new things for sure. I really appreciated, you know, at the beginning, you talked about how that the level of poor air quality really, you know, can be seen as negligence on the part of professionals to, you know, have homes that that could harm the people, whether it's those new homes that you spoke of, that off-gas, or whether it's poor quality housing, including that which is provided for First Nations people, you know, generally by the Government of Canada. So I think that thank you for ending your talk, reminding us of the importance of reconciliation and of recognizing the role that we have, not only in greening, but also in reconciliation as tradespeople. So thanks very much for that. And thank you also for highlighting that there are scenarios of success, like the legislating of the ozone layer and the adaptations that were made. So it's not a hopeless situation. We can make a difference. We just need to work together. So I'm honored, likewise, to work with people like Matthew and Sam and Jill. And so we do have a few questions. Some got answered in the chat, but I am going to throw out a question. I know that the one that related to the RAC program, Sam was able to answer. There is a question about insulation, which maybe Jill can answer, which is about whether hemp insulation has been approved for use in Canada. I don't know if any of the panelists know the answer to this question. I do not. So if anybody does know the answer to the question, I loved, Jill, that you talked about blue jean insulation. I remember as a kid being forced by my parents to crawl into the attic space to install that fiberglass stuff that was hideous, probably not good for my lungs. So if anybody knows about the hemp, that would be great to answer that question.
I put up an answer to that. There are some people producing hemp insulation in Canada.
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay, good. So it must be legal, approved, and available.
It is code compliant. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. An interesting general question I'd really like to throw out. I think it's a nice final question that I'd like you to think about answering. And I'll go with Jill first to answer, and then Sam, and then Matthew if we have time. The question from one of our guests is, if you had a room full of elementary through high school teachers and guidance counselors, what would your message be to them about the skilled trades? I think, Jill, you've probably thought about this a lot. I'm sure you all have. What would you say to those people who are guiding the next generation to decide on where they're going to work?
That's a fantastic question. And as a matter of fact, today we had planned to have grade 8s come into our carpenter shop, and they were going to build a project. And with that comes the teachers and some of the parents. And unfortunately, it was canceled due to a snow day. But we really do a lot of good work at outreach to the public schools and the high schools, and have them come into our college and do hands-on workshops. I think reconsider and just be open-minded and look at every student and every single opportunity that they have, and no matter what stream they go into, the skilled trades are something that are such viable, amazing careers. And it's not about learning a trade and being on tools the rest of your life if that's not what you want, but you have options. You can go into so many different areas as you go through your career. And the one thing that was common to me was, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. Trust me, there's so many opportunities within the skilled trades. I've given a little bit of thought, and I use myself as an example to really think about that and promote the trades as viable, amazing careers.
Thank you, Jill. Sam, what would you say?
Yeah, I get to speak about the trades quite a bit in my current role, and often what I share is from a personal perspective, the opportunity to provide a living for my household, for my 3 daughters, is just been. I've been so grateful for that. The other thing is the communal benefit. We all live in homes, apartments, whatever that looks like. We live in buildings. We drive vehicles. We experience what the skilled trades have built. And so the opportunity to give back and to mentor those coming up in the trades is still there. Opportunities like Jill and Matthew have mentioned. Working at a school like SIT, I get to work here because of in the trades department because of my Red Seal Journey Person certification. So I always try and cast a bigger picture for the opportunities that are out there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, Matt, very briefly.
It's opportunity to use your hands to provide solutions. You are bombarded as a young person with all the ways that the planet is falling apart and all the issues we face globally. And I think if I was a young person, I'd be a little bit distraught. And I think the skilled trades provide you a way to put your boots on the ground, as it were, and get that, not just that feeling that you're doing something, but the knowledge that you actually are doing something to contribute to solutions. And of course, I support both Sam and Jill's excellent answers.
Thank you so much for that. Well, we've come to the end of our time, and there are some fantastic additional answers and questions in the chat. Thank you so much to the participants who are so active in commenting and asking questions. This has been a tremendous opportunity. I learned a lot, and I'm very thankful to Sandra, who supported our 3 speakers with exceptional slides and images and additional facts. Thank you. And thank you to CAF, to Emma and Emily for opening this up to so many people. available. There will be a recording. It will be shared. The deck will be shared. So you'll get to see Matthew's extensive resource list, and you'll be able to listen back. And maybe even you want to screen some of this for your colleagues, your students, those folks on your job sites. You can take some snippets of what's been shared today and share it with those people, because it's been truly inspirational. So I thank you very much, Jill, Sam, and Matthew, for the time and thoughtfulness you put into your presentations today. And we look forward to doing this again. I know Sandra and I are already thinking of the many different ways we're going to invite you folks, all three of you, back to speak to other audiences. So I wish you all a very excellent rest of your day wherever you are. Stay safe, and you know what? Thank a tradesperson every day for the comforts and safety that you experience. Thank you.